It is now 5:02, Tuesday, September 12, 2017, and I call to order the special meeting of the City Council of the City of Victorville, and the City Council seating is the Library Board of Trustees, Southern California Logistics Rail Authority, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Victorville Redevelopment Agency, the Victorville Joint Powers Financing Authority, the Victorville Water District, and the Victorville Housing Trust. May we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Gomez.
Good evening.
Councilmember Kennedy.
Here.
Councilmember DeGretti.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cox.
Here.
Mayor Garcia.
Here. Well, this is the time and place for the general public to address the City Council on any item listed or not listed on the agenda. Per Government Code Section 54954.3, state law prohibits the council from addressing an issue not previously included on the agenda. The council may receive testimony and set the matter to a subsequent meeting. There's no one in the audience that wants to address the council at this time, so can we have closed session announcements by our
First
city
item in
attorney?
Closed session at 5.
Yes, we have 3 items this evening.
And we go
Items
in just like
A
we do on
and
our
C are related. They are existing litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956D1. The case name is SEC versus City of Victorville, and the case numbers are set forth on the agenda. Item A on behalf of the City Council, item C on behalf of the Airport Authority. The other item is item B on behalf of the City Council, anticipated litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956. Excuse me, 9D2, and the facts and circumstances related to that are set forth on the agenda. To the extent there's reportable action, we will report either at the conclusion of the closed session or at the commencement of the 6 o'clock regular session.
Thank you. We will now recess to closed session, and our special meeting convenes at 6 p.m.
The workshop items. But then there was a need for closed session.
Gotta really be careful.
Well, we don't know what's going on with this. Yeah.
It is now 6 o'clock. Today is Tuesday, September 12, 2017, and I call to order this special meeting of the City Council of the City of Victorville. And the City Council sitting is the Library Board of Trustees, Southern California Logistics Rail Authority, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Victorville Redevelopment Agency, the Victorville Joint Powers Financing Authority, the Victorville Water District, and the Victorville Housing Trust. May we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Gomez.
Good evening, everyone.
Councilmember Kennedy.
Here.
Councilmember DeGretti.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cox.
Here.
Mayor Garcia.
My agenda is put together a little differently. Do I call for the closed session items first?
Thank you, Mayor Garcia. Yes, we had 3 closed sessions at the 5 o'clock meeting. Those items were existing litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9D1. That was item A on behalf of the City Council, and item C on behalf of the Airport Authority. The case names and case numbers are set forth on the agenda. Item B was anticipated litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9D2, and the facts and circumstances pertaining to that litigation are set forth on the agenda. At this time, there is no reportable action with respect to any of those items.
Thank you. We will have the Pledge of Allegiance, and our Captain Schuler will lead us. Please stand. Madam Clerk, did you want to read the public statement first, or should I call out the agenda items?
If you would like me to read the statement at the time we get to public comment, I can do that, or I can do it now.
I prefer that you do it now.
This is the time and place for the general public to address the City Council on any item listed or not listed on the agenda. Per Government Code Section 54954.3, state law prohibits the council from addressing any issue not previously included on the agenda. The council may receive testimony and set the matter to a subsequent meeting. Comments are to be limited to 3 minutes per individual or less as deemed necessary by the mayor, depending upon the number of individuals desiring to speak. All communications are to be addressed directly to the council, not the members of the audience. This is a professional business meeting and courtesy and decorum are expected. Please refrain from any debate between audience and speaker, making loud noises, or engaging in any activity which might be disruptive to the decorum of the meeting. Any person or group who interferes with the conduct of a city council meeting by willfully interrupting and or disrupting the meeting is subject to removal. A peace officer may be requested to assist with the removal should any person or group fail to comply with an order of removal by the council. Any person or group who resists removal by a peace officer is subject to arrest and prosecution pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.9, Penal Code Section 403.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, are we going to move public comment?
No, I just wanted to make sure the public understood that refrain from loud noises and such. My whole purpose of that. We
I'm
have
sorry,
two-
Madam Mayor, we couldn't hear you quite clear. Is a microphone? Can people in the back hear everything? Okay, thank you.
We have two items on our agenda tonight. The first one is conflict waiver, letter agreement, Boulder Canyon Project. Madam Clerk, read the recommendation.
The recommendation is that the City Council approve the conflict waiver letter agreement with Braun Blazing Smith Wind PC, authorizing simultaneous representation of the City of Corona and Victorville in the negotiation and development of an agreement permitting Corona to provide scheduling coordinator services to Victorville for electric power from the Boulder Canyon project.
Thank you. This item here, is this for our city manager or?
We do need a motion to approve it on behalf of the council to approve the conflict waiver letter.
Second?
Motion by Mr. Kennedy, second by Ms. Garcia. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? None opposed. Motion carries unanimously.
Now we move on to item number 2, discussion and possible action regarding cannabis policy options. Madam Clerk, read the recommendation.
This information was compiled for discussion purposes. Any subject action or further direction for staff is at the discretion of the City Council.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, if I could just sort of do a brief introduction into the council discussion on this. The council has had a couple of different workshops on this issue, some of which I think there was a misunderstanding about the purpose thereof. This item is intended to essentially start over with the city's governance and regulation of cannabis, both medicinal and adult use. There have been a few changes since the council last considered this. To a certain degree, and I'm not the attorney, but to a certain degree, the medicinal and the adult use have been somewhat kind of mashed together for retail purposes. But what staff has done is put together a couple of different decision trees, should you choose to use them as a tool, or you could also walk through the discussion in the actual written agenda item. It talks through the personal use, the cultivation, personal cultivation, medicinal versus adult use, licensing, ultimately getting to potentially taxes and fees and other issues, and then finally implementation, each one of which ends with policy decision points for the council. The way I've tried to explain this to those that have asked is that our intent in setting it up in this way was for the council to be able to have a meaningful dialogue about these issues, and sort of get to a point of governance regulation that the majority is comfortable with. If at some point, as you walk through these options, you hit a point that a majority is not comfortable, then it would not make sense to continue to move on, because there's sort of steps along this continuum of regulatory options. So I do want to thank Janelle Davidson, who I actually asked to step out for just a moment to check on one thing for me, but she's the one that put this together with the help of our Assistant City Attorney, Tara Taguchi, on the end, in order that the council can have as much information as we have at this point. So what staff is looking for tonight is some direction about how, if and how, the City Council would like to regulate the marijuana, the cannabis industry. There are certain things that Prop 64 allows for that is in conflict with our current ban, and that's recognized in here. City cannot ban personal use of marijuana. The city cannot ban personal cultivation, but it can regulate personal cultivation. And it essentially walks you through the options. And so with that, I'd love to open it up to any questions the council may have about any of these issues, and we'll do our best to answer from both a legal perspective and a staff perspective. But that is the extent of my presentation.
Go ahead, Jim.
Question. The calls that I've gotten are not so much what to approve or not to approve. Promises of riches, which always gets my attention. But I've never seen any factual data. Exhibit C that you provided, sales and use tax, we know requires a vote of the people.
Well, this is just simply the sales and the normal Bradley Burns sales tax.
Yeah, but the state excise tax and the state cultivation tax and the city's business tax is limited by a 218 study. Actual cost of enforcement, which is probably going to range 50 cents. And the excise tax, not a sales tax, and that has to be enacted by the voters. And huge amount of misinformation floating around, and I'm wondering if staff was going to address that particular issue at some point.
Not at this point, partially because we don't know what the council is interested in from a governance standpoint, but then also as we learned at our last workshop, although there was some discussion about whether the numbers were 100% accurate, 50% accurate, the reality is that because of the newness of this option for cities to tax these businesses or the sales, and because of the newness of this as an option in California, staff is not comfortable recommending that you make a decision tonight based on a revenue outcome, based on a revenue projection. I think it's a tremendous unknown, exactly how much money there will be available. Certainly one could look at Colorado, but California is a much larger state. There are already several communities who have made decisions to move forward and are, if the decision were based on a revenue basis, there are several cities who are already well out ahead of Victorville in seeking that revenue, in allowing those businesses for the revenue side of it. My greatest concern is that because of that, there are cities who will have somewhat of a green rush effect, being the first in, who will have initial sales that will probably be through the roof because they'll be one of the only providers, one of the only options. We can't get out in front of that as a city at this point. There's not enough time to do that. I think the real question that I don't think anybody can answer right now is, what does this industry look like 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because over that time frame, my personal estimation is that this product will become more normalized, will ultimately, at some point, I don't know if that's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, it will be just like alcohol is treated now, in my personal opinion. When that happens, or as that happens, those initial green rush communities who have that windfall because they were the first in to that revenue stream, ultimately that revenue stream is going to go elsewhere. Just today I read in the newspaper that the city of San Diego is going to be allowing cultivation, which is another new big player in the cultivation of cannabis. City of Needles, I think we all know, has the power and the water that it, based on what I read in the newspaper, Adelanto is perhaps struggling with a little bit. So my whole point in that is that I don't think anybody can predict with reliance what the taxes, what the revenue might look like for Victorville next year, or especially 5 years or 10 years from now. So I don't think that's a good basis for you to make your decision. I think the better basis would be, where are you from a governance perspective of this this product?
A couple of observations. One of them is, I think for the city or any governmental entity to think it can effectively regulate individuals' behavior in their home or in their backyard is probably smoking something. Any way we can do that. I think what we would do if we attempt to regulate that private behavior is we'll create laws and ordinances that we cannot and will not enforce. And that will only breed and inspire disrespect for laws in a more general way. So I hope we take regulation of personal behavior in the home or in the backyard off the table. I think it's a waste of time. The other thing that I think is likely to happen, of course, if you look back at prohibition and alcohol and what happened with that, there might be some similarities. My guess is that most of the cannabis that will be consumed in the foreseeable future will either be medicinal or it will be grown at home and consumed personally, and none of that's going to be subject to sales tax. So I think anybody who seriously expects this to generate much revenue is probably smoking something. I think it's, I hope we get some revenue off of it, and I suppose if we have retail outlets, I hope they are taxed, and I hope that produces something. But I don't think our decisions ought to be driven by a hope of a tax windfall.
Madam Mayor, I have a comment. We tried to bring our ordinances in line with SB 54, I believe, earlier this year. And so when you ask 5 council members their opinion on 7 items, you might get a little different feedback from each one. So just to make this simple, I believe we already have ordinances on the books, and my intention or my vision was that we were going to bring those ordinances up to date with SB 54, and so much in line with what we've already got. So that's where I was hoping to go, and I just want to let you know.
I feel the same way. We have to just abide by whatever rules we have to abide by at this time. Outside of that, I don't.
Listen,
So just on a timing perspective, part of the reason we needed this workshop tonight was should the council choose to adopt an ordinance that would take effect prior to the implementation of adult use marijuana in 2018, we would need some sort of direction tonight to make those changes so that they could, an ordinance based on the council's direction, could be written and taken to the planning commission for a hearing. Ultimately, it would have to come to the city council for 2 hearings, and then have a 30-day waiting period. So just backing up from January 1st, we will quickly run out of time if we don't have some sort of direction tonight on a change to our ordinance structure.
And I agree with Mr. Negretti that we should be in line with state law. I think it's silly to try and line up with federal law. Seems to me the one thing that we really should consider, and it sort of relates to the problem we've had with this huge number of liquor stores, maybe the only necessary regulation is to say how many retail cannabis outlets does Victorville need. Maybe that number is 10. Maybe it's 5. Maybe it's, I don't know. But it seems to me that might be a decision we'd want to look at. If we could go back and regulate today the number of liquor stores we have in Victorville, I think we'd probably set a number and just say, that's enough. We don't need any more than that.
If we have no more discussion, should I be moving on to public comments then?
Well, I think there's comment cards on this item that people want to speak on this
Well,
item.
if there's no comments, I would like to proceed with some of the comments that I have as well. So from my understanding of Mayor Pro Tem Cox's opening question is that excise tax is only done with an initiative and the vote of the people. Is that my correct interpretation? Mayor Pro Tem Cox?
Question?
So is it the case that it's only done through an initiative and through a vote of the people? So that would be a question for the attorney.
Yes, any kind of excise tax that's not already in existence would have to be voted on if it's in addition to the existing sales tax that you have right now.
Because I know we had the discussion about cannabis and taxation. We have a 0.5 cent Measure K coming up November 2017. And that was one of the issues that we had brought up, or at least to discuss and possibly put this on the November 2017, if that was a question that arose. But we did not put that on the November 2017 ballot that's going to come out. Is that still impossible?
I don't think we can make the timing on that. And, you know, if it's a tax on cannabis, what most cities are doing,
Right.
they are adopting it as a general tax as opposed to a special tax. I think there's only one city in California that's tried to do it as a special tax. If it's a general tax, it then has to go on a general election, and the first time that could happen would be November of 2018. So, and the difference being a general tax only requires a 50% vote of the electorate. Special taxes require 2/3 vote to pass, and also are restricted with respect to what you can use the funds for as opposed to a general tax. So I think when there was a discussion about taxing medical marijuana, if that was even an option, most cities are doing it as a general tax, meaning it could still happen, and it would have to happen in 2018. So you'd still have time to do that.
Okay, so then it was a moot point to bring the initiative now, since we discussed it earlier on, and we could have had the option of putting it on that November 2017. Is that correct?
If the council had given direction back when it was discussing the other tax,
Right.
I don't think there was any discussion about it, but had they decided back at those meetings to do that, yes, that would have been an option potentially. Again, very difficult, I think, for it to be adopted as a special tax. Like I said, it's only one city we're aware of in California that's doing it that way.
Okay, and then my understanding for Councilmember Kennedy, the private use of regulation probably is not possible. So I was thinking about if that were the case and we didn't regulate the private usage of cannabis, what would we be doing when we consider giving permits? And I'm thinking about landlord tenants. I'm thinking about any non-restrictive zones. I think it would benefit the city to have an actual zone rather than just say you do whatever you want at your house, because if it's an apartment complex, that's the landlord, and you can have certain zones if that is the case. And this is a mere imaginative question that I'm trying to seek some advice.
I know you're directing it, I think, at Councilmember Kennedy, but I don't think you could do zoning with respect to the residential use Personal use, because personal use is allowed within the home, period, under the new laws. What you could regulate if you wanted to is basically commercial outlets. So if there was a commercial sales facility or something like that, you could regulate that, and the law currently allows you to do that. But regulating zones for personal use, I think, would be impossible.
So then the only regulations would come in with commercial, not residential, but it would also include industrial?
If that's what this council desired, that's something you could certainly look at or have the planning commission look at.
Yeah, personal use, personal cultivation can be regulated by the council as far as the location, that sort of thing.
So is it possible, I don't know, I don't think we have a study with any kind of zoning maps with C1s, C2s, anything that if we decided to have a specific land where we would have that cultivation occurring, or any zoning, right?
So if you wanted to do that, that's something you could give direction to staff. We would prepare something to go through the planning commission to come up with those options. So if I could point the council, if you haven't had a chance to look, just to help foster discussion, Exhibit E is a decision tree that the council could use to kind of walk through these issues one at a time and get a sort of up, down, yes, no vote on regarding personal cultivation. And then Exhibit F goes to the commercial cannabis business activities, including cultivation, including adult use, including medicinal. And similarly, it's a little bit more complicated because there's more options, but the council could sort of use those to walk through and come to a decision point as to where you land as a majority on each of these issues.
So I know that the city of Victorville currently has a full ban on commercial usage. We have not addressed the personal or the medical side of it with Trailer Bill 94. And I know if we didn't want to make any decision and do no type of regulation, January 18th comes forth, and then the state would supersede whatever the local municipalities have in place. Also in regards with Prop 64, SB 54 is sanctuary cities. That's not of a discussion here at this point, so I thought I'd make that a little bit clear. And I still have a...
Councilmember Gomez, I apologize for interrupting, but I didn't want to get too far away from one of the comments that you made. What's interesting is that our ordinance, because it was adopted when medical marijuana was the discussion point, our ordinance actually specifically prohibits medical marijuana, not adult personal use, because that was not legal per state law. So the council back then addressed what was made legal by state law, and so as a result now there's actually not a ban, depending on your reading of the law or of the ordinance. There's potentially not a ban against just the personal adult use of marijuana.
Yeah, that's not what I said. It's the commercial ban, because we have not, as of today, addressed the personal or the medicinal. So there's nothing in regards to any city ordinances for those two items, just the commercial.
Well,
And actually, it's not the commercial, because the commercial wasn't an option when that ordinance was originally adopted. It was only
medical,
medicinal or medical marijuana. So that's what the ban currently says.
So just before I continue my talking points, I know there's a lot of stakeholders here, and I like to recognize them for being here and being very supportive of any way or any decision that the city of Victorville chooses to either give staff direction or not. So when I announce you, please feel free to stand up to recognize if you desire so. I have Nicolas Perez. He's the president and founder of the Inland Empire Cannabis Business Association here. This association prepares businesses to apply for the licensing, provides businesses financing, insurance for property equipment and crop and green energy solutions for large numbers. I also have Mr. Alejandro Topete, Jr., the Secretary of Firehouse Healthcare Industries Incorporations here. I have Jose Curiel, the founder and CEO of the Medical Marijuana Educational Center, MMEC. I have Stephen Figueroa, a government corporate relations for the McGuire Brothers Enterprise. I have Caesar McGuire from the McGuire Brothers Incorporation. I have Diana Holt, Secretary of High Desert Cannabis Association, HDC, with President Tim Graston here also of HDC. I have Stephen, the board member of Firehouse Healthcare Industries Incorporated. I also have community residents here. Ana Guzmán, muchas gracias por tener cuidado de tu ciudad y estar aquí hoy en día. So thank you, Ana, for being here and supporting your community. I also have Francis Schwalwicker, CEO of Mary Jane University Cannabis Education. We have with us also Manny Serrano, a businessman in Victorville for the last 10 years and a resident for over 20 years. We have Scott Markovich, a very good friend and a supporter of cannabis, and many, many other people here that I'd like to take the time to say, but I know I might be overstepping my bounds by saying everybody's name here. So some of the talking points: taxation and regulation of a highly profitable industry would provide a financial windfall of revenue for the city of Victorville. Most importantly, it would serve to promote public safety. So we know that the more law enforcement we have out in the streets, the less we have crime of increase. Also, other benefits to the community: we have communities throughout California that have already voted to approve the regulation and the taxation. Most recently, we see the city of San Diego. This additional revenue can be allocated by the city of Victorville, city officials, to meet the needs of the city. Dispensaries, if that were one of the parts of regulations, would boost the local economy and create jobs. Consumers are counting on its local officials to provide them with a safe product. By choosing to tax and regulate cannabis, Victorville would enjoy more than a guaranteed revenue stream. It would serve to provide residents and medical patients safe access to quality cannabis that has been tested for safety according to the California state standards. And this is in the same regard to alcohol regulation. If you remember, Prop 64 mandated that all cannabis is required by state law of California to be scientifically tested to meet quality and safety standards. There's also benefits to the public safety. Having a sound policy and regulations in place will assist the California Bureau of Cannabis in regulating itself and allow the city of Victorville to enforce its own rules. By controlling cannabis in the community, it also works to eliminate the black market, which is the aim of the Bureau. When the prohibition of alcohol ended, so did the black market, which had brought with it the criminal enterprises. People are no longer dying by consuming alcohol out of lead containers, and there isn't a single San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputy serving today that is arrested or has been in a shootout with a bootlegger. So why? It's because organized crime for alcohol cartels effectively ended. Ironically, as a result of taxing and regulating alcohol, it is actually more difficult for minors to obtain alcohol. As a prohibited substance, it's much easier to acquire. It may sound counterintuitive, but regulating cannabis has the same effect, while garnering profits that can be allocated for educational awareness for teens. And as most of you know and are aware, it's easier for a minor to acquire. It's less easier for the minor to acquire cannabis and even heroin and methamphetamine as it is alcohol. Why? Because alcohol is regulated. The federal government estimates that 60% of all revenues enjoyed by drug cartels is derived from unregulated cannabis. By moving financial profits from criminals, public safety is improved and funds can be used for benevolent purposes. Taxation and regulation of cannabis, in my opinion, makes sense. And we need to control the revenue taxes generated from cannabis. What I'm hearing with these conversations is that we are at best, if we send any potentialities of revenues that are being made, let's just send them to the cartels, since we refuse to accept the potentiality of taxation. Tax revenues could improve technology, fix our infrastructures, create more parks, beautification of our city, hiring more law enforcement and firefighters, and also building a smart city. 56% of Victorville residents this last November 8th election voted for cannabis to pass. I respect these voices, and I understand that now we need to provide safeguards for the community at large, and I propose that council consider a limit of companies that would be used in our city for the purposes of cannabis. And as we all know, there are very few that are neglectful with the usages, just as there are with any other pharmaceuticals or any alcoholic beverages. I would also like to make it known that this analysis, by the way it was written by both city and formal, whether it's implicit or explicit, Council opinion pushes towards a reading of voting a no for the allowance despite the 56% of the Victorville electorate, which they sought during the last election. In addition, I would focus on bringing small businesses more businesses by creating an ordinance that specifically states that services require or mandate the must of locality. For example, if ordinances include security cameras, they must be installed and maintained by local businesses if available. Businesses must show due diligence in securing necessary local services. Same for security alarms, etc. All requirements should have local contributions. I would ask that a clause be embedded in the purchasing contract or where needed to capture this essence, to focus on small business regulation. All businesses, whether they're delivery or retail, must have proper documentation. Businesses must also have workers' compensations, just as any other business would. I would like to see the creation of decent application fees and have scheduled inspections of facilities. Facilities of these businesses are to be made available to city inspection during normal business hours. For example, if there's a new application and the applicant pays $7,000, that should be divided into 2 payments. Also creating fees for inspection throughout the year to ensure that businesses are following protocols, and monies definitely should not go to a general fund. That's it. Thank you.
Please. I have some cards of people that want to come up and speak. Craig Garcia is the first one, and after him will be Tim Gregston or Gregston.
My name is Craig Garcia, and first of all, I didn't appreciate her introducing people out here because nobody else got introduced. I think that should be in your rule book, that she shouldn't be able to do that. And I know the people she introduced. That's why I stood up over there so I could take a look at them. So I know what they're here for. She knows what they're here for. And that's the reason she wanted to give them a priority. But the next meeting I come to, if that's the case, I want to be introduced to. You guys know me. You can introduce me. One thing I wanted to talk about is the control of the dispensaries, these marijuana dispensaries. And what you guys were saying was controlling the number of dispensaries. That would be the greatest idea you can, because we don't need 80 dispensaries in this city. We just don't. So controlling the number of dispensaries would be key. In regards to cultivation, I believe the state law says if a person wants to grow marijuana at his house, he can grow 6 plants. Am I right? Yeah, 6 plants. But there has to be some kind of regulation. You can't just let these people grow every third house is growing marijuana. There has to be some kind of regulation. I know the city of Victorville can't do that because we don't have enough police. But if you guys could create an enforcement where these people can be checked on, it would put more people at ease. Put a lot more people at ease. One thing that came to my attention that I was talking to one of my cousins is the number of different marijuanas there are. There's a ton of them. So calling this cannabis or calling it marijuana in general, no, that don't even touch on it. So, I remember a couple meetings ago, somebody objected to using marijuana, the word marijuana. It's cannabis. Well, there are so many different types, you can't even call them no more. In regards to the dispensaries, again, I think that the existing dispensaries can continue doing what they're doing. You give them a time range of when they can come up to regulation. And the new regulations that the city should come up with is just basically to control the dispensaries. I know the council can ask to put together a committee of citizens to discuss this issue. And I brought this to Mr. Kennedy's attention and Mr. Negretti's attention. Put together a committee for and against, so we can talk about this. This is a big issue. This is a real important issue. And like I've said before, I'm here, my grandchildren are here, my children are here, we're going to stay here. But this issue needs to be talked about in further.
It's
And
3
I think you
minutes,
should
sir.
put a committee together.
Your
And
3
I'd
minutes
be
are
the
up.
first to volunteer.
Thank you. Tim Cranston. And I must remind everyone that you do have 3 minutes only.
Okay. Couple things. It's SB 94. Thank you. My name's Tim Graston. I'm with the High Desert Cannabis Association. Thank you for letting me talk here for a minute. It's SB 94. You know that is the law of the land now. Atlanta's doing 8,500 people per dispensary, and we believe that's a good number. And you guys can do some fees between now and the election in November. To get right down to it, you got 80 dispensaries in the high desert right now that are running on weed mouths. Atlanta's going to have about 3 or 4 walk-in dispensaries for medical. We don't know what Hesperia's going to do for delivery, but they did pass delivery a couple of weeks ago. They're going to try to do it on the medical side to comply with ALMA. You're going to have about 15 legal licensed places in the high desert if you in Apple Valley do nothing. That leaves 65 people that are going to be out there running the black market. Whoever gets the licenses will not be able to compete with those people because we will have to be charging 27.5% tax. If we have to charge 27.5% tax and we are up against people in your city that are not charging any tax at all, we cannot make ALMA work. So we're begging you to please allow legal, safe, responsible access. This is going to put a strain on the city of Victorville, whether you guys like it or not. The legal dispensaries are going to ask you to regulate and bring on and make the illegal market go away. So the way to do that is bring extra code enforcement in and to enforce the laws of the AUMA. So the fees would allow you to compensate for that you charge for the dispensaries, and until the election, then you can charge whatever you want. Between now and then, we need to all have a safe start at the first of the year. Nobody can get a license in the state level unless we have a city license. So we're all in a fix. We all need to work together, and we all need to work this all at the first of the year. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Now it's Scott Markovic, and then after Mark, Carmen Rosales.
Mayor, City Council, thanks for this opportunity to come before you. 2018 is right around the corner, and so there's a lot of decisions to be made. Doug, well said. The city has a lot to do, a lot of direction. There's a lot of unknowns. I sense with a lot of you, and I think it's the right direction, a lot of caution on this. This is kind of a lot of uncharted waters. You as city council members understand state mandates. I don't think there's going to be a lot of clarity on how all this is going to proceed. And typically, regulation becomes a slippery slope for cities because this is where the buck stops here, and especially on free markets and if they meet the requirements. But there probably isn't any real definitions of what the requirements are and how it will be sold. So again, there's going to be a lot of work on that. But typically, I think what your city manager is requesting of you, especially in regards to your constituents and your law enforcement, they're going to need direction, especially law enforcement, of what are the guidelines and the boundaries, because you can see where people will be cultivating in their backyards way and above, and the use of the drug or the marijuana or cannabis may be inflicting upon some of the civil rights of their neighbors who don't use it. You can see all of these things start to become a big can of worms. So I like your cautious approach, and I think it's good for law enforcement too, that we go cautiously, because there's going to have to be a lot of clarity that comes with time and stuff. So good luck. This is not an easy decision, but I've seen a significant change, as you've followed in the papers, of acceptance of kind of the new norms that are starting to happen in California, and the values and morals typically change. I personally feel it's for the better, but I think your cautious approach will work out, because some of these cities, I think, are going to outpace their infrastructure regarding the development of some of this stuff. And that could become problematic, especially when you share the same resources with the surrounding cities. So again, good luck, and stay cautious.
Now I have Francis Schauwecker, and then after Francis, Nicholas Perez.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Thank you for receiving our comments today. And I wanted to remind you, part of the reason that we are here is because there's a lot of sick people that are in the high desert. There are people that are suffering from seizures, people who have Alzheimer's, and people who are suffering from cancers. They're dying from cancer, and they're finding some benefit with the use of cannabis as medicine. I'm not asking you today to accept cannabis. I'm not asking you to choose that for the city. I'm asking you to open your mind and let people choose that for themselves through regulation. We, as local cannabis businesses, are asking for the council's help. We know that cannabis is here to stay. We have a majority of voters in the state and in your city who have voted and passed Prop 64. So now what do we do here? How do we handle this situation? We are asking for regulation for quite a few reasons. It is a cash-based business. A lot of vendors do find themselves with large amounts of cash. Sometimes some of the employees that do work with the delivery services find themselves with large amounts of cash, and sometimes that makes people uncomfortable and leaves them open for crimes to happen. Another thing is we need access to banking so that we have a place to put the cash. We also need access to business services. We need insurance. We need health insurance. I don't sell, transport, distribute, manufacture, cultivate marijuana. I do have an education business because, just like the city manager mentioned, we need to be educated about this. There's so many variables that are shifting right now with all the different regulations as they continue to shift. We don't know what's going to happen, but what I want to do is help educate people along the way. I want to help bring them accurate information. I want to talk to them how it could support their body, and I need a business license to do so. So I thank you guys for being open-minded and hearing our comments here today. The last thing that I wanted to say was that by helping these local businesses, you're protecting moms and dads and grandfathers. You're protecting their livelihoods and their businesses. I have 3 small children, all 6 and under, and I'm a pretty busy woman, but I do make my business with cannabis, and you protecting the local people will help keep those big business people in New York and keep money in Victorville. Thank you.
Nicholas Perez, and after Nicholas, Manny Serrano.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and esteemed members of the council. Thank you again for allowing our comments to be heard here. And what I simply wish to do is actually just simply inform you that you do actually have an advocate here in the Inland Empire. Our association, the Inland Empire Cannabis Business Association, is exactly that. It's a membership of business owners, and strictly pertaining to the idea of a business, we're here to help our business owners that do want to make the full conversion, that do want to be regular businesses in the city, promote their business legally. But the biggest thing is that we're also here to work with you. We want to work with different cities at this level to be able to create maybe a pre-certification process, so that way you know someone applying for a license knows how to run their business, knows the ordinance, knows the law, knows the zone, and knows how to run something profitable. That can be revenue. And yes, Mayor Pro Tem, you made a great point, is the idea of just saying just the sales revenue is going to bring great riches to the city. That's not the case. But when we have the right amount of businesses here that are regulated and that are overseen by the city, the ancillary benefit that someone's going to have a real living wage, someone's going to be able to go spend that money at regular places, at Kohl's, at Applebee's, at other places, that's the ancillary benefit that when we can get this right, we can actually promote growth within the city, jobs within the city. And so what we look to do is bring our members that are ready to be proper businesses, bring them to a forum maybe with you, bring tax professionals and other industry professionals that have been doing it legally in other states to create the ordinance. We have the opportunity to do this right, especially in California. With the blank slate, yes, there's a lot of unknowns, but that means that we're able to actually put together something that benefits the city, that benefits law enforcement, that benefits business owners, and with all those three working in tandem, they can really, really benefit the area that we're in, the city that we're in, the county that we're in. And all I wish to do is simply say our service, our association is here to work with you to make sure that these unknowns, we could bring a professional in to say, here's how we've done it successfully. When we talk about tax, how to really make it beneficial here first and not the block idea that's just for California. Colorado pulled in $136 million in tax last year just from the cannabis space, but that was for the state. If we're California, we know that most of these other states that do it legally, they buy from us a lot of times. So if we're able to engineer the right opportunity for not only our local residents to have a proper business here, but for also the other states that wish to purchase from us, we can control the market, control the ordinance, and make sure these business owners are doing something that they have a passion for in a legal manner, so that way they can be a proper member of our cities and our society. Thank you for your time.
Manny Serrano. After Manny will be Diana Esmeralda.
Thank you so much, Mayor and City Councilman, for Councilwoman to be able to listen to the residents of Victorville. Not only am I a resident of Victorville for 25 years, but a businessman for 10 years with the international franchise Edible Arrangements. I'm also a permit holder and a CUP holder in Adelanto for manufacturing, cultivation, and hopefully for the dispensary. And Tim here, the president of HDCA, is correct. You want to follow SB 94. You're correct. It is the merger of both adult usage and medical marijuana. That is called SB 94, and that's really the law and the regulation you want to follow. They are so well written that you really do not need an outside consultant service. That process alone, when somebody follows those regulations, they will be vetted out. Because true businessmen with attorneys, accountants, surveyors, architects are only the ones who are able to pass this threshold of these regulations and rules. It's not about allowing the citizens of Victorville to use cannabis. It is the access that you are trying to allow. And it even is not that. It's about safe access, tested product and medicine. We are not in the cannabis business. Don't let anybody fool you. We are in the compliance business. Real businessmen know that. We follow the regulations to the T so that the residents and citizens have safe access. We know that we must comply with that. And when we comply with that, people recognize that. And they go from all over the world to come to this center called the High Desert. They want to know. We are presently working with our organization with several researchers from UCLA. They are medical doctors, researchers at UCLA, and they represent 32 other medical doctors. Many of the state, local, elected officials have visited my facilities. They are impressed with the businessmen. I invite you also. You are welcome at my facility at any time. Let me show you what serious businessmen can do to bring your city to a state of wellness. Thank you so much.
Diana Esmeralda. After Diana, Steve Figueroa.
Good evening, City Council. It's nice to see you this evening in well health. I just wanted to speak on a couple of things on this agenda item and say that we've come so far, right? And this is about regulation and about regulating. This isn't about astronomical numbers, and no, we don't know exactly what those numbers are going to be because this is a new and emerging market in the city. So I do want to say Darren Parker has said it's going to be about 4 years before everything is solidified and we get it all straightened out and it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. So we have a little bit more time to understand the different statistics and exactly how this is going to play out in our communities. Speaking on the green rush, it's out there. Sometimes it looks more like green slush, but it is a green rush out there, and there's a lot of misinformation, and High Desert Cannabis Association is here to help you educate the community. So we already have a reputation in the communities here in the High Desert, and people like to hear what we have to say in regards to helping them understand safe access and reasonable regulation. At the beginning of next month, we will start holding workshops in terms of cannabis regulation and licensing and helping those businesses that want to come forward and be compliant here in the desert. So I wanted to let you know that that is moving forward, and Victorville is more than welcome to be a part of that. There are actually, in SB 94, it says that there is one retailer per 10,000 people. So Adelanto has decided that they would do 85 to 1, 8,500 to 1. Victorville, being a bigger city, could even go 10,000 to 1 and still be compliant with SB 94. Like I said, we would love to help you educate your community and educate your cannabis business people in the city that would like to pursue licensing and would like to build a bridge of relationship with you and with the community to be here and give you tax money, okay? And then also, I just wanted to remind you that HDCA has had job fairs for cannabis at the Adelanto Stadium during Abracadab's festival, and we did have about 300 people apply with their resumes, and not just, crazy people or people with no education, but they have horticulture educations and people with medicinal backgrounds and nursing educations and degrees. So we have to remember that people coming into this industry are not just people that are uneducated or haven't come from a business background, but there are several of us that would love to be part of a business conversation with you. We're also members of the Chamber of Commerce, helping cannabis businesses, again, with that bridge. We want to help you with that bridge, okay? And it's well known we are well known in the community, and we're willing to use that to Victorville's advantage again, I would like to say. So that's all I have to say tonight. If you have any questions, you have my email. I've sent you several emails, and I'd like to keep that dialogue going. Thank you so much, Honorable Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Steve Figueroa and then Anthony Rhodes.
Hi, good evening. Been many years since I've seen many of you. Jim was my old college professor. And remember when I ran for the Senate? That was my issue. Make marijuana legal and Prop 22 against Pete Knight, and it all came to pass. So let me go. I come from a city where, guess what? We're opening up the Cheech Marin Museum, the Chicano Museum. And we all know Cheech and Chong. So that's how far conservative communities have come, recognizing that we can create new revenue sources without raising taxes. And that's why I love this situation, and do it in a safe manner. The gentleman is correct. You do not need to employ any consultant. You got them all here because they want to do it right. I represent a number of nightclubs. It's all in the CUP, and we know that, and the conditional use permits that you permit. And one of the things I know many cities are doing, that if you've had a business coming in with a lot of violations, they're saying, hey, we're not going to allow you to open up a marijuana dispensary. You've already been cited in 3-4 other cities. And that's one of the conditions that they're putting, that you know how to run a business and you know how to do it right. And you pay your taxes, and that you've got your salary permits. You got everything okay with the state, because SB 94 is the way to do it. But it's all in the CUPs. We want to make sure that the individuals have a successful business track. Although anybody can open up a business and be successful, we just never know. I'm happy the city is taking up the issue. I will be advocating for some businesses up here. But I'm just happy that, and hope that you can push forward. And you got all the consultants you need right here in the audience. Save your city money. I'm a person who says, I usually go against bonds and new taxes, especially when you can generate new revenue without raising taxes, and this is a great way. So I'm glad you're taking up the issue. Thank you.
Anthony Rhodes.
Good evening, Council. My name is Anthony Rhodes. I'm here to advocate for local businesses and agree with Ms. Gomez's statements. I would like to see, if possible, or if it's in the purview of the Council, if services are required for these dispensaries, if allowed, that they seek services from a local vendor, specifically whether that might be electronics, plumbing, whatever their needs might be. We'd definitely like to keep that money here in the high desert. I also agree with Mr. Kennedy's statement that liquor stores are abundant, and that's just not in Victorville, but in other cities as well. But we've seen Victorville take the stand and the lead on the attack of alcohol consumption with the single-serve ordinance. If possible, maybe it's considered, as far as if Victorville decides to allow these dispensaries, that they also consider some type of ordinance that allows for or limits the amount of product that is able to leave the facility. Furthermore, limiting the amount of locations is definitely important, because we've seen the same thing with liquor stores. Just as with restaurants that Victorville has, if Victorville allows dispensaries, they're also going to see businesses from other places, or business tax revenue from other cities, neighboring cities as well. If you have a business such as Cracker Barrel that's coming in and no other city has it, well, they're going to go to you to purchase that or to consume or enjoy that business. Just as if you allow dispensaries, you're going to see people from all the neighboring cities come here to purchase those products. I also agree with the idea of the green rush. I think initially we're going to see the revenues come in at a high amount, but they will tailor off. And that's just in terms of the retail portion, but as to also address the personal cultivation, is I say I'm a heavy guy. I eat every day. try to eat fresh food. That includes tomatoes, potatoes, squash. It's kind of funny, but at the same time, when I do eat those foods, I don't grow them myself. So for the idea that everybody's going to all of a sudden start growing because they're able to is not something I see happening because of the resources, the time it takes to do it. Just as if we talk about there's different kinds of marijuanas, well, there's different kinds of alcohol as well. You have alcohol, you have Jack Daniels, you have Jameson, you have all kinds of different varieties available. So I just think that it's more important to focus. Thank you.
That was the last card that I had. So we go back to direction for staff.
Mayor, I had a request to speak on the public comments.
I haven't come to public comments yet. So have we decided if we are making a decision, or is this to be continued?
Thank you. I listened very carefully, which I did. I got a whole page of notes. I would like to go through those, and I probably have questions of staff and the attorney. And I'll submit my recommendations to the council in writing. This is only to take the input. We're going to have a lot of chance to submit our recommendations, to amend, come up with a proposed ordinance. Then it goes to the Planning Commission for a hearing, then back to the council for 2 more hearings. And I have seriously considered everybody's input. And when I get through this and get some questions answered from staff, I will be more than happy to submit any recommendations I have at that time. Thank you.
You didn't want to read your questions now, or?
No, I think it's an imposition to go spend 20 minutes asking questions that only the staff can answer, and they should be able to research and answer on those times.
Well, thank you for being so considerate.
Certainly, we don't ask the attorney to give a legal opinion based upon our questions here. We submit questions. He takes the time to research. I would expect staff to do the same thing.
Very well.
Madam Mayor, I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Cox's comments.
So,
Well, I would just like to restate my view that we shouldn't waste time on trying to devise regulations over people's personal use. I'd like to stay focused on commercial business use. I'm not much, once we've accepted that a particular trade or business is acceptable, and we're fighting it, which, we've been fighting this for 70 years. It's always been a stupid fight. The fight's over. Let's allow a certain amount of free trade happen, as is true with other industries. I would just like to see a limit imposed on the number of retail outlets that are established in the desert. That would be my only real thought.
So are we recommending for this to be continued?
No.
Do we make a decision at this time?
Sorry, say again.
Are we making a decision at this time on how we're going to vote on this?
I'd like to see staff come back with some. Jim, you've got questions you want?
Oh, I got a lot of questions.
Posed to staff?
I heard 5 dispensaries per 1,000 or something, and then there was one comment, we need so many in the desert. We're not concerned about the desert, we're concerned about Victorville. I kept very careful notes. All of these, I want to get them answered. I'm not going to get them answered tonight. That would be foolish to even try to go into those. But, I heard about a lot of use for the medicine. I'm told, I think, from the attorney, but I want to go through that on, we are really limited on what we may or may not do in regard to cannabis for medical purposes, including delivery and so on. Need to get that clarified. If there's no question and we can't regulate it, we don't need to. We need to tell the attorney to go ahead and draft it. But Yeah, we need to move forward on this, but, a lot of information here. And maybe the council is far more familiar, have more experience than I do. I'll defer to those who have that experience.
And then I'd like to echo what Steve Figueroa had said, creating new revenue without raising new taxes is the way to go. I agree with Kennedy, free trade with some regulation. As Cox has also said, policy and some ordinances. So I don't know what direction, if we've given you anything or you have at least several of our opinions and you've heard, you can build some consciousness to the next study that you're going to be bringing towards.
I don't know that I have any clear majority direction to be able to have staff work on an ordinance to send to Planning Commission. So my concern would be the timing of that, and perhaps the attorney could answer what happens if we have nothing new in place prior to January 1st, because this really is our last opportunity to get that ball rolling. I don't know if the council wants to look at an interim or an initial ordinance that does something other than the outright ban while you mull the other options. Just throwing out suggestions, whatever you want to do is fine, but I want you to know the full impact of the decision you're looking at making.
That after January 1st, we never have a chance to have another ordinance on this issue?
No, I'm asking of the attorney is what happens with our current ordinance effective January 1st if we don't adopt something prior to?
Right? No, it is still in effect. You are, even under the new SB 94, you are allowed to regulate, and we have, unfortunately, from just inaction at this point, we have a ban on the books on medical marijuana. That would probably stay in effect.
What happens, let me just toss this out, what happens if we remove our ordinance and just accept the state regulation such as it is and wait and see?
Then it'll be completely up to the state to regulate. The state right now is going through a process of setting up regulations to provide licenses. January 1, they're potentially going to issue licenses. Those license holders then will probably be grandfathered in. So if you try and regulate it after January 1, there's probably going to be a slew of individuals or businesses out there that will have licenses that you may be in conflict with. They will be, basically, they will supersede your ability to regulate them. And right now, on the books, you have a ban on medicinal marijuana. So if you want to relax that, this is the time to give direction to the Planning Commission to look at that issue.
So Doug, I know you said that you don't have the majority consensus, and I happen to be on the minority. Thank you for clarifying that. I usually know that. But again, I would say that there is a need for some regulations. A lot of the businesses here need those permits, and we don't want to be in conflict later on, not protecting the families like the gentleman, Mr. Garcia, had said. So everyone has some kind of safety access, and then law enforcement has direct understanding of what it is that they're looking for, because right now, what would they be looking for? So we want to provide some clarity, and that's my input as a minority here, in my opinion.
Blanca, it always feels like we argue over these things, and it's not my intent. By me talking about a majority, I mean a majority, not the majority. I think it's pretty well known that there tends to be somewhat of a 4-1 council. That's not the majority consensus I'm looking for. If 3 of you agree to do something at this point to direct staff, any 3, you then become the majority on that issue. That's all I'm saying. I didn't hear 3 like opinions on anything. I heard maybe 2 here and there, but ultimately, in order for the staff to move forward with direction, I need a majority of the council to give me that direction. It doesn't matter who's in that majority.
Okay, so then I'll make a motion to have free trade in consideration with policies and ordinances, which means that I agree with what Kennedy had said in combination with what Mr. Cox had said. So if you guys want to modify that and somehow bring it forth, that's fine.
What exactly is the motion?
So there should be some kind of regulation when it comes to commercial. We do expect free trade, and so I agree with that respect with you, and I agree with what Mayor Pro Tem Cox said that there should be some policy or ordinances. However, he has a couple of questions. So if I make the motion, someone can second it. And if no one agrees, I guess we just wait till January 1st or January 18th and we let the state do what the state needs to do. And if it's conflictual, I guess we could bring it back January 18th and start discussion again.
Russ?
I don't think that's a motion that gives staff much direction. I think what I'm struggling with, and I don't know if anyone else is, we have an ordinance in place that's going to create certain effects on January 1. There are some options available to us to create new ordinances. I do not have a clear idea in my mind what either of those two things are. I'd like to know what the effect of our current ordinance is. Maybe the first decision we'll want to make is to get rid of that. Then maybe we'll decide on what other sensible ordinances we should consider.
Madam Mayor, I have a quick recommendation for the council. I understand what the city manager is asking for. It may be the recommendation here from me would be that he pulls the individual council members and go through the decision tree and see if there is consensus and then move forward accordingly. No, later.
Later.
Yeah.
I have a recommendation. If we have an ordinance that's in conflict with state law, it seems like the first thing we would do is prepare an ordinance that's not in conflict with state law. Secondly, if medical marijuana is permitted, we need to draft an ordinance that says it's permitted. If the delivery is permitted, we need to draft the ordinance that says it's permitted. Those things that would put us immediately in line with what the current laws are and throw the current ordinance off the books and start moving on this. And then the other issues about how many and where and the Planning Commission's input can occur later, but if we have to start someplace, I think we have an ordinance that's probably not enforceable. We need to get rid of it. Secondly, we have things that have been approved by the voters that's permitted. We need to have an ordinance that acknowledges that. I don't see why we can't move in that direction fairly immediately.
Yeah. Right now, you have a ban on the books on medical marijuana, regardless of cultivation. Basically, it's across-the-board ban. Under SB 94, that ban could actually still be in effect. It might get undermined by new state regulations, but at the present time, SB 94 allows local jurisdictions to regulate medicinal and medical marijuana. When in January 1, there will be no ability to regulate cultivation, distribution, manufacture, essentially, or of commercial recreational cannabis. So that's going to be a free-for-all. So you're going to have a ban on the books on medicinal, and you're going to have absolutely no regulation on basically recreational marijuana.
I understand.
That's where you stand right now.
I understand what you're saying. I appreciate it. But we already know that if we put a ban on medical marijuana and we get sued, we're probably going to lose.
Not necessarily. That you're going to spend a lot of money on litigation. You may or may not
I've never
lose.
heard the council say that we need to ban medical marijuana. I mean, we did before, but we've...
Right. That's what staff's looking for,
If
direction.
I go through the note, I was numbering how many times there was a request specifically for that and the delivery.
How about if we make a motion for staff to bring us back whatever action is required to remove that ban? Step one.
I agree.
So there's a motion on the floor, so if it would be said that it died, so it's not just lingering, because then we have a substitute motion and a tertiary motion, it just confuses the entire thing. So if my motion died, it just died.
That's correct. There was no second to your
if there's
motion, so that died.
the substitute motion from Negretti, no one seconded, his died.
I don't think those were motions. They were
Made a motion.
they were recommendations, is
He
what I
was
believe.
making a recommendation.
He used the word motion and then started discussions with Kennedy. So I took it as a substitute. So if that's not the case, he doesn't have anything. So now we're on Kennedy. I just want clarification.
I don't want to try and eat the elephant all in just a whole series of bites. I'd like to just take it a bite at a time if we could. That seems, I mean, I think your points were good, Jim. I think if we come up with an ordinance that's consistent with state law, it's going to deal with medical, it's going to deal with transportation, it's going to deal with retail, I don't know.
The questions, yes, the first thing you could do is you could have a motion as to whether or not you want to eliminate the ban on medical and medicinal marijuana.
That's my motion. We'll see if it goes anywhere.
Councilman Kennedy, I have a question for you, though. I understand what you're saying about being consistent with state law, but very early into the state law allows the council the discretion to then regulate. So the state isn't telling you how to regulate, it's giving you the opportunity to regulate. So it's not that simple, is all I'm saying.
Isn't the state going to establish rules on January 1 about this issue?
Yes.
Isn't that what we want to get in?
The city council ultimately needs to decide what it will allow within those rules. What level of marijuana use, whether it is, obviously, it sounds like there's no support or not enough support for a complete ban at this point. Not surprising. So the real first question, if you're going to allow any commercial activities, is it medicinal only, is it adult use only, or both? That's really the threshold question. What does the commercial activity in Victorville look like to this council, if any? Perhaps you attempt to regulate the personal use, but not allow the commercial. But I'm hearing voices saying that they do want to allow commercial use. And if so, the first question is medical, adult use, or both? Sort of the threshold question.
May I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I didn't think we could prohibit the personal growth and use.
You can't prohibit it.
You cannot prohibit personal growth and personal use.
Should that be included in an ordinance to acknowledge that we're not going to prohibit?
It could be included in there. That's consistent with state law.
Okay.
However, you can regulate the commercial side of that.
And talking about the personal use, you can regulate the way the personal cultivation happens. You can regulate it to indoors only. You can regulate it to outdoors only. There's various options. Not making any recommendations, but those options are available. How we would ever, just being honest here, how we would ever use code enforcement to try to enforce those regulations would be difficult. So I think that's why you're focused on the commercial activities.
So yeah, you need to decide, do you want to regulate commercial activity, be it medicinal or be it personal recreational use or not? You cannot regulate personal use, personal growth, and personal use in a home.
Right.
You can put some. I take it back. You can put some regulations on that, but you're right. As a practical matter, enforcement's going to be almost impossible.
I'm doing my best to not impede on the council's discussions because I think it's healthy. If you're looking for sort of an entry level, if you will, I think directing staff to remove the ban to be compliant with the proposition and with SB 94. I think that sort of entry level for the regulation would be to allow for deliveries of medical marijuana within Victorville, but not allow for the retail sales. That's the
Is there
entry level.
any reason we should ever adopt an ordinance that says we're not going to do something? Should we ever adopt an ordinance that says we're not going to regulate this or that?
Well, no. We're suggesting you have an ordinance right now that does regulate it, and the question is, do you want to get rid of that?
What I'm saying is, if we don't want to regulate personal use at this time, can't we just be silent and let that go?
You can on personal use. Then the question becomes commercial or just personal use in the home.
And are you saying we have to deal with that before we can make a decision to get rid of the existing ban?
I'm not saying you have to deal with it right now. I'm saying that if you don't put any regulations in there come January 1, there's going to be potentially anybody could open a commercial marijuana business. That could be a cultivation business. It could be, all types of different options because you have no regulations on the books.
But we're going to have more meetings between now and January 1, am I right?
You don't have a lot of time to get that done. We need basically a green light right now because of the time frames involved in adopting an ordinance, the public hearings involved, the need to go through the planning commission. We don't have a lot of time.
When does the light turn red?
Tara, what the last date would be?
I think you've got about
it's a bright
2 weeks.
orange right now, I think.
Well, as far as the last day, there is a requirement under SB 94 that the state check with the local jurisdiction before it issues a license. And there's like a 60-day period in which you're required to respond, otherwise they will issue the license. So although really it would be best to have something in place before the beginning of the year, arguably there may be a little bit of tiny bit of room to move, but our understanding is that's, if they don't hear back from you, then they might just go ahead and issue one anyway. And the kind of regulations that I think staff is talking about is basically, if we are going to permit these types of businesses, where are they going to be located? How many? What types of security devices do they have? What are their hours of operation? There could be zones or areas, places you don't want them too close to a school or whatever fits in with the state. So those are the sorts of things that would need to be determined, as well as reasonable if we're going to do regulatory type licensing fees. They need to reflect the actual costs associated with the city's enforcement, because there could be inspection requirements on license
So
fees.
October is basically the end of the line for us if we're going to get something done between now and
We need something in September in order to meet the Planning Commission schedule, followed by the 2 hearing schedule, followed by the 30 days waiting period, if you will, before it takes effect. So, but we don't, not to disagree with our assistant attorney, we don't need the council to decide all of those things at this point. I think we have a good, reasonable staff that if you decide on what you want to regulate and give us some sort of direction in that manner, we can come up with some best practices. We can look at what other cities have done and propose things to the Planning Commission, who can mull over, make some final tweaks, make some of those decisions for you, which then comes forward as an ordinance for the council and the public to have input on. Just because it comes forward saying XYZ, this many days, this many security, whatever, it doesn't mean that it can't be changed when it gets to the council level.
I want to regulate medicinal and commercial. I don't want to regulate individuals. I want to get rid of the medicinal ban.
That could be a motion that would give some direction to the Planning Commission to start
I'll
working on
make that a
something.
motion, and we'll see what happens.
Can you repeat that?
Hmm?
Can you say that?
Yeah, the motion would be to direct staff to come back with ordinances that, number one, remove the current across-the-board medicinal ban, and then an ordinance that regulates
both medicinal,
both commercial and medicinal.
adult use. Regulates.
As
So
to where, how many.
some recommendations from the Planning Commission as to where those could be located, how many.
But we will then approve what they come back with, yes or no, or change it.
Ultimately,
We're
would be
not making the final. We're just saying this is a direction.
And I'd like to modify that motion to have specific zoning areas that we can start looking for commercial use.
What?
I said I'd like to modify what you just say. So what you said, and I want it to include specific zoning areas. It's just not going to be all over Victorville. It
Right.
has to.
That's what
Mayor Garcia, we know you're saying no, but it was my turn to talk. So that's what I'm asking to modify.
I think that was assumed as part of the Planning Commission process.
It wasn't said, so I didn't know that. So thank you
Right.
for the
So
clarification.
I think if I understand correctly, I don't want to put words in your mouth. The motion is for the Planning Commission to look at eliminating the across-the-board ban on medicinal and to look at reasonable regulations of both medicinal and adult use that can be consistent based on zones that they're located in and or possibly number of both personal use dispensaries and, personal use, adult use dispensaries and medicinal dispensaries.
Yeah, and this has to go through Planning Commission.
Correct. And
Yeah.
so you're looking for, I assume, advice and direction and recommendations from Planning Commission along those lines. Is that a motion?
That's the motion.
Second?
Second.
I have a question.
Yes.
Again, I have a lot of questions, and I won't ask them tonight, but one of the questions that confused me was that if the personal use, we don't want to regulate something we're not going to regulate, so we're not going to mention it. With patios against one another, And so we get the complaint from the individual that has a 2-year-old, and the cannabis smoke is so heavily 6 feet away, they can't use their patio. We just say, nope, tough, we don't regulate it, because other cities are regulating that.
You could ask for the planning commission to give you, then
Okay.
also regulation
That's
on.
what got me when you said the comment about we're not going to regulate it.
Jim, how is that different than a neighbor that plays music at 12 at night and I can't
There
sleep?
is an ordinance against that, and you can file a complaint, and we have to enforce it.
Well, I think there may be some issues that we'll want to deal with in regulation in the future.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Your rights, an individual's rights stop where another person's nose begins.
I agree.
And we can't say we're not going to regulate it. We can say we'll adopt it in the future as need arises.
I'm not saying we're not regulating. I just don't want to deal with it right now. I think it's.
Well, I know.
I think we want to deal with it at some time when we.
We
begin
have to
see
start.
the problem.
We have to start. The motion and this, did you second it?
No.
And
Oh,
then,
oh, you
just,
second,
yeah,
The
just for,
second's over here. We have to start someplace, so.
and my understanding is, it could be, I don't know if it's SB 94 that declared this, but I know I've seen it in other cities where 600 feet away from schools, churches, youth centers, parks, so-and-so. But that's just something, I'm not sure if that was an SB 94, or it was just the city implementing that regulation because it was state mandated or not, but I remember listening to stuff like that.
Yeah, the first item in the agenda talks about the personal use, and following actions are prohibited. Number 1 is smoking cannabis products in any location where smoking tobacco is prohibited, which is our parks and things, or within 1,000 feet of a school, daycare, or youth center while children are present, with certain exceptions. So that's the existing state law.
All of that would be covered under reasonable regulations, right?
Yeah.
And staff would be, okay.
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to make a quick comment. If you look at the decision tree and the many moving parts to this, I believe a single motion is not sufficient to consider the totality of the issue that we're talking about. So my recommendation was earlier that in an interest to get consensus from the council is that the decision tree be worked with the city manager, pulsing the actual council members to make sure that he has the guidance from each one of us on many of these complicated issues. What I've heard tonight is there's not been enough discussion, there's not been enough research, there's not been enough facts, and to move forward with a recommended ordinance, I don't think we're there yet as far as the level of complexity that we're talking about.
How about this? How about if we add that kind of a polling activity for the preparation of what's going into the recommendation or to the direction to the council, to the planning commission? Sure. I like that idea. I think everybody ought to have, if they have strong feelings, they ought to hear it, what they are.
And it's interesting we talk about that because in my several hours upon hours and weeks upon weeks in talking with staff individually and as groups, I've actually sat down with them to have these discussions so that when we come up to the dais, we have a well understanding of how our votes would affect the audience and the taxpayers and everyone else. So for me to hear some of these comments to say, how many hours did you spend in education would be the same way. How many hours did you spend behind closed doors talking with staff, understanding and getting more knowledge so that this can move on consistently? And so I wanted to say that because I'm always put on the spot in that regard. And I am new. I've not been here for 2 years. So for Mr. Negretti to be here 2 years and not to have had that educational conversation with the experts that we have on staff, I mean, there is no need for in the future to say, Blanca, how many hours have you spent? Why are we asking these questions? Because this is very healthy conversation, and I really enjoy this. So I laud you for coming up to say this, because this is exactly the kinds of conversations we need to start having.
I would strongly recommend you worry about yourself and don't worry about me. It's clear with the confusion that we're talking about, the many questions that we've gone through. So don't even think about trying to lecture me about anything.
How many people did you bring right here today? 5? I'm not lecturing you. I'm saying we're getting an education together.
I know that.
I think I'm going to change this. My opinion is that I will never vote for dispensaries. Medical delivery, yes, but I would never vote for dispensaries. That's my opinion. I have no control over personal use and 6 plants that they can grow, and of course they're going to grow more than that, but we have no control over that.
There was for the record, I think there was an attempt to amend the motion, but it wasn't seconded. Was it your intent to second the amendment? Or?
Oh, yeah, to add the polling, yeah, that's
So
fine.
now that we have a motion and the motion is amended, what is the motion?
There is a motion and a second, and it has been amended. There were 2 amendments. So we would vote on the most recent version with all of the amendments.
Somebody read the most recent
I'm not
version?
sure of 2 amendments. Can you?
I only heard one amendment.
Well, the first one, let's see. The first one was a removal of the current ordinance on a medicinal ban, and then it was amended to include bringing back an ordinance to address both medicinal and adult use, and then Ms. Gomez added that she wanted to see something in there about zoning locations that would there could only be in certain zoning locations, and that would be part of the direction.
And then I think there was an addition, which was that part of the analysis before it goes to Planning Commission should be to poll the council
Yes,
members
and
and
the
get their
polling,
input.
yes, right.
So I think that's the motion essentially, is to direct the Planning Commission to look at elimination of the ban on medical marijuana, to look at regulation or make recommendations as to regulation of both medical and adult use marijuana, to
have them look at zoning.
to take into consideration zoning and
Commercial.
number. I think we said also number of both medical,
For adult use.
both
yeah.
medical and or adult use dispensaries, if any. And lastly, in the part of their analysis, to poll the council members with respect to the flow charts that are here, to get their input and had that all directed to Planning Commission for recommendations.
But before you take a vote, not to switch roles with you, Andre, but I'm a touch concerned about the polling option and that potentially being seen as a violation of the Brown Act. So if you say it's okay, I'm 100% for it.
If you
But
poll
before
them,
we do that, I need to hear from you that it's okay to do it.
you have to poll them without anybody else being in the room individually and just get their opinions, and you can tally those opinions and pass those on to the Planning Commission as long as there's no consensus building amongst the members.
I just want to be sure.
What Eric thinks, so I decide if I agree with him or not. That's
Right. No, I know how to poll, but typically I don't get direction to poll. Normally it's something that we do a lot of times before an item comes forward, just to get some sense for where the council
Yeah,
is.
but with our
or if
time
there's not a meeting,
constraints, I
so.
think it's appropriate.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
And
I
again,
just
no consensus building. All you're going to do is ask the
want
questions.
some city attorney holy
pass
water
those on
sprinkled
to the
on that
direct-
process, and I'm
right.
good.
Okay, so I can move on to public comments?
No, we
Oh,
got to do
We're having a vote on the
On
motion.
the motion.
Did you do the motion yet?
Call for the vote.
Oh, we've heard the motion. Haven't we heard
Call
it?
for the vote.
So there's a motion by Mr. Kennedy and the second was Ms. Gomez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? None opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Now we move on to public comments. People. I have one card. Bob Nelson. What is this?
What speaker?
Yes. Get back. Yeah, Bob Nelson. Although I live in Hesperia, I've known Victorville since World War II, when we moved in my family's ranch in Summit Valley. Our founding fathers gave us 3 rules for making wise community decisions, best meeting the needs and goals of the community during a public meeting, found in the First Amendment. These meetings should be open to all wishing to attend, with no rules regulating free speech and a free press on watch to make sure the first 2 rules are followed. This evening, a small test of that 3rd rule, the presence of a free press on guard to make sure the first 2 rules are followed. The following 300-word letter to the editor will be mailed to the Victorville Daily Press tomorrow. If we have a free press on guard during public meetings, as intended by our founding fathers, you will read this letter in the Daily Press within the next few days. If not, We urgently need a real free press for the High Desert region. The letter. On April 16th, the San Bernardino County DA's office, for the 10th time since 1996, will request the dismissal of a PC 403 public meeting disturbance case unethically filed with exculpatory evidence in hand, People versus Nelson, with 3 PC 403 counts of unlawfully disturbing Hesperia City Council meetings of June 6th, 20th, and August 1st by a breach of a 3-minute limit on rostrum speakers, and 3 PC 148A1 counts of unlawfully resisting or delaying those arrests. The star defense witness at trial would have been County DA Michael Ramos himself, admitting he dismissed a 2004 public meeting case in People versus Nelson, MSB 076720, because essentially the defendant did nothing wrong in refusing to yield the rostrum on being told his 3 minutes were up at a public meeting with many speakers and a long agenda. Further, the website archive meeting videos show these were lightly attended meetings with few speakers, adjourned with over an hour of scheduled meeting time left, and so lack Brown Act authority to impose a time limit on First Amendment protected speech in order to ensure that all wishing to speak might be heard. Finally, the deputy's belt recorder would show these were essentially standard PC 847 arrests, how-made arrests. Each time the speaker, on being ordered by the deputy to leave the meeting, replied by asking if he was being arrested, until the deputy finally said yes, followed by full cooperation. Clearly, public meetings in this county lack 3 essential elements as intended by the Constitution to make decisions best meeting the needs and goals of the community residents: freedom of speech, elected officials taking seriously their honor oaths of office to support and defend the Constitution, and a free press on watch. Copies of my ephemeral press are available on the back agenda table, and I've given each of you folks a copy. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, before we adjourn, I have one request of the council. I have submitted an opinion to the Daily Press, and I'm hoping they'll print it as a Valley Voice item. And it deals with the tax issue that's before us on the November ballot. And one of the things I've said in that piece that I sent to the Daily Press was that I was going to ask the council to create a standing agenda item for public discussion for every meeting between now and the November election, so that we can encourage and invite a public discussion to give the factual information, not to advocate one decision or the other, but just to give factual information. It's my hope that we can get some public interest in this issue and get a real serious discussion about it. So I don't know how...
Inappropriate to do that tonight. I would put it on the agenda for next Tuesday night.
It's worthless. It's worthless.
Well, but next Tuesday night.
There's no time.
You can't
We've
get
got
a, you can't get a,
meeting.
you,
That's it.
I understand, you can't have a vote on it tonight. You've got a meeting next Tuesday night. You can put it on that agenda.
Okay.
There's no other business before the council, so meeting is adjourned.